Welcome. Welcome back. Productivity Maximization Index. Today, I will be able to show what I'm doing. Because I'm simply doing some reading before class. A time-tested technique for enriching oneself with a college curriculum. We're going to be focusing on ethnic studies today. Specifically, we're looking at building the racist foundation, colonialism, genocide, and slavery, manifest destiny, the philosophy that created a nation, the colonizer and the colonized, and they called them greasers. We might watch the Rage Against the Machine video, but I doubt it. And we're going to be listening to Becoming America Throughline Podcast. This is Productivity Maximization Index. Welcome. Let's begin. Why is the white racial frame so embedded and so foundational in the United States? The central reason is that this country is built on about 350 years of extreme racial oppression. Over its first centuries of operation, this oppression aggressively targeted Native Americans for extermination or expulsion, and targeted African Americans with a bloody slavery system. From the 1840s to the 1960s, powerful white capitalists and politicians gradually brought into this pre-existing system of racial oppression yet more people of color, such as the Chinese and Mexicans in the 1840s and 1850s. What? Oh, I see. Okay, I thought this date was like up here. It was my mistake. Frequently to secure low-wage labor for whites' wealth-generating economic enterprises. For whites' wealth-generating economic enterprises. Not surprisingly, whites have long tried to legitimate and rationalize these extensive and lasting patterns of societal oppression they have created and maintained over centuries. A large majority of whites, both elite and ordinary whites, have become partisans and defenders of white power and privilege, especially by means of the white racial frame. Playwright Eugene O'Neill once famously noted that there is no present or future, only the past, happening over and over again now. Indeed, the better we understand this past of bloody racial oppression, the better we can understand our present racial situation with its still dominant racial hierarchy and rationalizing white racial frame. Jesus, why am I being attacked? Now, this is productivity maximization index, so I'm just gonna speed through this because I don't care. Just ask me for the PDF or something. I have to finish this for class. Yeah, get someone to say it. Anyways, European colonialism, bloody exploitation. Today, many scholars and popular analysts continue to describe contemporary Western societies with terms like modern and modernity. They emphasize as positive certain characteristics of these modern societies: industrialization and technology, market economies, national governments, and complex bureaucratization. However, numerous supposedly positive features of this distinctive modernity have played a major negative role in the genocide, land theft, and labor theft that accompanied the global expansion and colonialism of European countries beginning in the late 1400s. Strikingly, colonialism, capitalism, modernity, and global exploitation have a common genealogy. European colonialism and capitalism were in early stages of development when they generated the cross-Atlantic slavery system. European colonialism took on its exploitative, wealth-generating form in the concert with the enslavement of Africans and other indigenous peoples across the growing North and South Atlantic economies. The European theft of land and super exploitation of enslaved labor were presided over by ever-growing and bureaucratized uh, nation states, the latter usually described by Western social scientists as signs of the modernization process. From its beginning, European colonialization relied not only on a growing entrepreneurial bourgeoisie, but also on these nation state governments, most especially upon their military organizations. The political economic theorist Karl Marx captured the world shattering significance of European colonialism and imperialism in a brief statement on his book on Western capitalism. His book on Western capitalism that very explicitly mentions immortality. The discovery of gold and silver in America, the extirpation, enslavement, and entombment in mines of the Aboriginal population, the beginning of the conquest and looting of the West Indies, and turning of Africa into a warren for the commercial hunting of blackskins, signaled the rosy dawn of the era of capitalist production. Yeah. These idyllic proceedings are the chief moments of primitive accumulation. Capital comes dripping from head to foot from every. That's not a Y. It's in the wrong direction. Pour with dirt, blood and dirt. The rise of Western capitalism is rooted in the global seizing of the land, resources, or labor of indigenous people and other people of color by violent means. Commercial and industrial capitalism develops over this era because of the expanding Atlantic system of slavery. Just double checking. 1400s? No, that's a 1840s. 14. Okay. Marx also noted these close connections in an 1846 letter. It is slavery which has given value to the American colonies. It is the colonies which have created world trade, and world trade is the necessary condition for large-scale machine industry. Consequently, prior to the slave trade, the colonies sent very few products to the old world. What do you mean condition? And did not noticeably change the face of the world. Slavery is therefore an economic category of paramount importance. Wipe North America off the map, and you will get anarchy, the complete decay of trade in modern society. But do away with slavery would be to wipe America off the map. What are you saying? Clearly, systemic racial oppression in the form of a bunch of rich people hounding over these writers, and the massive enslavement of African origin people and extreme oppression of indigenous people and commercial industrial capitalism emerged together as part of the same political economic system. That no, because there would never be any successful revolution of the bourgeoisie. There's always this power grab that's happening that took root in European countries and their colonies in North America. In this early period, thus, modern capitalism was systemic racism, and systemic racism was modern capitalism. Philosophy was giving way to scientific discovery, and we see this a lot in the 20th century, how the instruments developed to study neurology changed a lot about the balance of power in elite circles, but merely elite circles. Note, too, that in the Americas, the coercing of the labor of Native Americans and Africans by European capitalists and other colonizers meant not only the extraction of surplus value from the productive work of these coerced workers, but often the extraction of the subsistence value of their work. Subsistence value. Yeah, sure. They place themselves as the boss. and get a bite of their sandwich anyways. That is, the money value of the work was almost entirely taken by the European and European American capitalists, so much so that many coerced laborers died from not having enough basic food, clothing, or shelter under this brutally exploitative colonialism. In the case of North America, the theft of the land, resources, or labor of indigenous peoples and enslaved Americans, enslaved Africans, it's lasted for centuries. Well, sure. Yeah, because it makes them like kind of psychically insulated against violence because they can't imagine it. Significant here is that for the first time in world history, militaristic colonialism was global in scope and encompassed several continents. From the 16th to the 19th centuries, European invasions forced a political, economic, and demographic reorganization of a large part of the globe at the expense of indigenous people. The Spanish nation state was the first to colonize and plunder on a large scale indigenous societies in the Americas for their land and their resources, but its growing wealth and military apparatus were soon countered by the expansion of competing English, Dutch, and French nation states and private companies seeking to gain wealth from overseas lands and labor exploitations. European nation states and associated private companies, such as English firms operating in the Caribbean and North America, discovered that there were huge profits to be made from overseas agricultural plantations using enslaved African labor on stolen indigenous lands. Indeed, by the end of the 18th century, a huge share of the profits coming into British coffers came from overseas slave plantations, producing very important agricultural products. Well-organized nation-state and private bureaucracies in Europe and the emerging colonies were critical to this expanding global colonization. In North America, the English colonies were often state enterprises created under the auspices of the kangaroo state-fostered enterprises developed by entrepreneurs, plantation owners, or merchants. The first English joint stock companies were formed by merchants under the auspices of James I of England. Employees of the Southern Company settled Jamestown, Virginia, the English colony that brought the first African laborers. A principal objective of this European colonization was to secure land and raw materials and to develop an array of markets. Once land was taken from the indigenous societies, the European search for labor to work that land soon led the Europeans' search for labor to work that land soon led to the extensive use of the African slave trade. At an early point, the private sector and the state sector collaborated in global exploitation and enslavement, which were rationalized in a Eurocentric racial framing. At an early point in time, the principal European nation-state actors collaborated with major capitalistic economic actors to generate the imperialism, genocide, and slavery that created the racial underpinning of modern Western countries. Okay. Social scientist Max Weber famously wrote of the Protestant ethic and spirit of capitalism in assessing the fostering religious conditions before and around the emergence of modern capitalism. However, in the Great European Expansion, one sees that what might more accurately be termed the predatory ethic of Western capitalism. Central to European colonialism and capitalism was a predatory ethic that asserted the rights of Europeans to take the land and labor of others by violence. As we see in Chapter 8, this materialistic and greedy approach to encounters with new environments and people baffled the Native Americans at the time. It had been described by Native Americans as a despiritualized worldview, and in their view, a despiritualized approach to environments and other beings resulted in the latter's brutal dehumanization and exploitation. Most European invaders showed little concern for the lives and livelihoods of indigenous peoples during the bloody process of colonialization and its unjust wealth generation. By the 19th century in the United States, this predatory ethic was given a rationalizing name, manifest destiny. My jaw is like going out of place. It's like I have an overbite, not an underbite, but my lower jaw keeps like jutting forward. It's so annoying. It's making it hard to read. Like in general. Anyways, a rationalizing name, manifest destiny, which asserted the rights of whites to the right of whites to expand wherever they needed to increase their own prosperity, no matter the cost of those people killed and exploited in the process. Significant too is the predatory ethic that was first vigorously dressed up in religious language as something God ordained. Very important. Most critical political economic analysts have generally ignored or downplayed the racist architecture of these long centuries of Western colonialism. Even for these critical class analysts, the dominant white frame seems to be a difficult set of blinders to get around. Most major groups that were exploited by the early and later European accumulation of wealth in these global colonizing systems were non-European, and each was soon denigrated, literally blackened, in an increasingly developed Eurocentric framing of colonialism and the new colonial societies. European entrepreneurs and colonists carried with them, or soon developed, not only the often noted realities of Western modernity, such as so-called private enterprise and advanced technology, but also other central societal developments ignored or neglected by a great many historical analysts. Systemic racial oppression and its rationalizing white racist frame. Don't I know it? Note, too, that the concurrent emergence of modern European capitalism, colonialism, and racial oppression marked the creation of a global racial order with European origin people at the top. One that was ever since regularly shaped not only individual societies, but also world patterns of trade, finance, employment, politics, and communications. Yeah, let's say that 9 times fast. White prosperity, white Native American lands, and African American labor. As most U.S. school children know, the first task the European colonists undertook in North America was to settle the land. This is the euphemistic phrase European Americans have long used for the theft of Native American Jesus fuck. As most U.S. school children know, the first task the European colonists undertook in North America was to settle the land. This is the euphemistic phrase European Americans have long used for the theft of Native American land, which regularly required bloody wars, often genocidal wars, because Native Americans frequently had resources to resist. Once the land had been stolen, the need for labor to work large sections of the land soon exceeded the supply of white workers. They destroyed the land. They, drained lakes and shit. Enslaved African Americans became a group that was internally central as essential labor to the prospering of North American colonies. By the 18th century, the slavery-centered society directly or indirectly involved a large proportion of white Americans in all major social classes. These included economically successful slaveholders in southern and northern states, the owners of slave trading enterprises, often in the north, associated bankers and insurance brokers, often in the north, and leading southern and northern merchants and politicians who actively supported slave plantations and the Atlantic slave trade. In addition, a large number of ordinary whites in all colonies, northern and southern, worked in occupations linked directly or indirectly to the slavery system. These included white-collar clerks and other white employees working for various slave-related enterprises, overseers on slave farms and plantations, sailors on slave ships, slave catchers who chased runaways, small farmers who grew agricultural products needed to slave plantations, lumber workers who cut timber for slave ships, fishers who traded fish meal to plantations, local and federal government workers policing enslaved runaways, and other workers processing slave-produced products for export, small farmers and urban entrepreneurs who rented enslaved workers for temporary profit. A great many whites benefited economically in one way or another from that huge slavery-centered economic complex, which encompassed the slave trade, commercial trade with slave farms and plantations, international trade in slave-produced products, and the array of slavery supporting occupations across the country and across the Atlantic. Over 2 centuries, isn't that like China these days? Ooh, creepy. Over 2 centuries, most whites gained material and or symbolic benefits from the racialized system of African American slavery, and often from continuing anti-Indian oppression as well. Fuck. Yeah, it's always built on cheap labor. The disparity is built on cheap labor. The society is held back by the disparity. And this is all done on the premise of destroying ecology. Yeah, eat that. The word exploit, in the sense of taking advantage of others for personal gain, appears in the English language in the 1840s during a peak period of African American enslavement. For centuries, African American enslavement was a major foundation for this country, for its economy, politics, and other major institutions. From the early 17th century to the 1860s, Civil War, much surplus From the early 17th century to the 1860s Civil War, much surplus capital and wealth stemmed directly or indirectly from slave trading and slave plantations. For example, U.S. plantations, cotton production. God, my bottom teeth keep tapping against the back of my top teeth, and it is like fucking pissing me off. Jesus Christ. Like, dude. It's like grinding my fucking teeth while I try to speak. For example, U.S. plantations' cotton production expanded greatly in this period, and by the Civil War, the New England cotton mills that relied on enslaved workers' cotton had become U.S. industrial leaders and value added. This extensive cotton production involved the torture-driven, often the technology of the whip, crackers, labor of enslaved black Americans. Without it, there would probably not have been a successful textile industry, the country's first major industry. Huh. Indeed, if there had been no textile industry, you're telling me you're drawing a line between COINTELPRO declassified documents and the slave trade in a way that's personal? God damn, that's something, dude. That's something. I don't have time to think about it. I'm productivity maximization index. And indeed, if there had been no large-scale African-American enslavement, they're box fuckers. There probably would not have been the huge North American wealth generation and possibly no modern wealth generating British and American capitalism on the massive scale that developed over the centuries. Enslaved workers cultivating cotton, tobacco, rice, sugar, and other major crops generating generated huge amounts of economic capital, much of which then circulated throughout Europe and the European bank and the North American banking and other economic institutions. This white-controlled capital in turn generated much spin-off prosperity. They don't talk about where white ideology comes from. They're just talking about how it makes money. This white-controlled capital in turn generated much spin-off prosperity, including industrial breakthroughs. Enslaved black Americans created much of this country's surplus capital, wealth, for more than half of its societal lifetime. Their labor even provided some wealth that white colonists used to fight a war against Britain. That is, white Americans bought their independence with slave labor. France was kind of keen on that, actually, but okay. Soft top. Wow. I feel like I already knew a lot of that, but it's nice to like put everything in perspective, like by the years and stuff. This is a cool one. I might have to come back to this at some point. All right, let's keep ripping. I have math homework. Which one next? Let's start here. Okay. First published in Britain in hardcover and paperback by Souvenir Press in 1974. Preface. Bro, what? The whole damn book? How long is part 1 and 2? Dude, what are you? What? Bro, oh, come on. Oh, there is a. What the. Okay, I've been... What do you mean? Is it in the... Alright, we'll look at this later. Bro, what the fuck? Way to fucking come out of nowhere with this shit. 44, 62, 42, 80. Alright, so here's the problem here, right? Like, I'm gonna read this. I'm not reading this to retain it. I'm not reading this to comment on it. Like, I'm reading this to complete an assignment. Like, this is like too fucking long, dude. Like, you can't just like throw one of these in here without fucking saying anything. Holy shit, dude. I'm getting attacked. I'm getting assaulted on a fucking daily basis. My teeth are clicking. My shit's getting fucked. And they want me to bullshit through all of this. Like, what do you expect? There's nothing of value here. I'm ready to skip this. What is this? Uh-huh. Dude, not fucking cool. You sign like a project like a few weeks out and you tell people, hey, work on this incrementally, right? Because that's like fucking fair. He assigns us like a study to read, that's like 13 pages. He assigns us that last thing that was 7 pages. There's this other thing, it was like, it's 5 pages. 84 pages? How am I learning? How am I fucking learning, dude? Fuck! I'm really agitated right now. I'm really fucking agitated right now, dude. I should just tear it up. I should just tear the whole place up, dude. I should just tear the whole place up, dude. That's what I should do. That's what I should do. I should tear the whole place up. I'm being assaulted, dude, and it is slowing down my reading. Then he comes around with this. Nothing. I'm never gonna speak about this in my fucking life. There's nothing. I'm skipping it. I'm never gonna be able to speak honestly about that piece of work ever in my fucking life because of how much time I have to spend on it. This looks like someone's website or something. This is an essay published about the 1800s. Yeah, okay. Not in the 1800s, about the 1800s. I hate fakes. I hate fakes so much, dude. I don't deserve fakeness in my fucking life, dude. Fucking rich people. Manifest Destiny, the philosophy that created a nation. This paper takes a philosophical view of the manifest destiny phenomenon and attempts to provide logical evidence that manifest destiny can be... It's tapping my fucking teeth again, dude. I'm being assaulted, dude. What part of I'm being assaulted do you not fucking understand? Wake the fuck up. Wake the fuck up. This paper takes a philosophical view of the manifest destiny phenomenon and attempts to provide logical evidence that manifest destiny can be argued as the sole reason for why America itself has a history. Few Americans have ever assumed that boundaries of the United States would stand forever unchanged. Manifest Destiny was the driving force responsible for changing the face of American history. It was the philosophy that created a nation. Manifest Destiny, the intangible of American history. American history was built on a chronological record of significant events, each event having a cause and subsequent effect on another event. Historical events are presented in history as being tangible, being tied to a date and an exact happening. Manifest Destiny, on the other hand, is a phenomenon. It cannot be tied to a date, event, or even a specific period of time. Manifest Destiny existed and still exists as a philosophy that embraces American history as a whole. Manifest Destiny is an intangible ideology that created American history. In its simplest form, Manifest Destiny can be defined as a movement. More specifically, it would be the systematic body of concepts and beliefs that powered American life and American culture. Powered? Really? Coining the phrase. In 1845, a Democratic leader and influential editor by the name of John L. O'Sullivan gave the movement its name. In an attempt to explain America's thirst for expansion and to present a defense for America's claim to new territories, he wrote, "The right of our manifest destiny to overspread and possess the whole of the continent in which Providence has given us for the development of the great experiment of liberty and federative..." You didn't type that. What? You didn't write this. What do you mean, what? Is that a real word? Okay. And federative development of self-government entrusted to us. It is right such is that of the tree. It is my eyes blurred, dude. It is right such as that of the tree to the It is right such as that of the tree to the space of air and the earth suitable for the full extension of its fruit principles and destiny of growth. I'm being assaulted. I'm being fucking assaulted. This is bullshit. This doesn't maximize productivity. Manifest Destiny became the rallying cry throughout America. The notion of Manifest Destiny was publicized in the papers and was advertised and argued by politicians throughout the nation. The idea of Manifest Destiny doctrine became the torch that lit the way for American expansion. A movement as old as America itself. Although the movement was named in 1845, the philosophy behind Manifest Destiny always existed throughout American history. For example, in 1818, Andrew Jackson, while taking a broad interpretation of vague instruction from President Monroe, led military forces into the Floridas during the Florida crisis. In a systematic and ruthless way, he punished the Seminole Indians for taking up arms with the Spanish, destroying Spanish forces, and captured several cities and ports. I'm like on the edge of biting my fucking tongue right now. Like, it's like, here, I'm being assaulted. I'm being assaulted. Fuck you. Americans who had moral reservations about the rough tactics of Jackson soothed their consciences with a familiar but not yet named philosophy. Their reasoning, the Floridas were a part of American territory. Therefore, destiny intended that America should have them. That's not what they said, or you would have quoted it. The reason why Americans were in Florida in the first place is yet another example of manifest destiny. The people of the Deep South, wanting more fertile land, exercise what they consider to be their right. The planter class, without any political approval or permission, just took over and started settling and planting the Florida territories. That's what rich people do. This move was an example of the arrogance that the Americans had towards expansion. Americans believed that they had a right to any land they wanted. First used in 1845, the term manifest destiny conveyed the idea that the rightful destiny of the U.S. included imperialistic expansion. This idea certainly contributed to several wars. For example, in 1846, the United States declared war on Mexico and proceeded to win much of what is now the southwestern United States. The war with Mexico was just one out of a series of aggressive attacks that can be tied to America's manifest destiny. Manifest destiny emerged naturally and inevitably out of fundamentals. What? What? No? It was fucking rich people meddling around and doing fucking brotherhood bullshit, fucking lying to people. How is that natural or inevitable? Fuck you. Manifest destiny emerged naturally and inevitably out of fundamental want and need to explore and conquer new lands and establish new borders. With this growth came moral, cultural, social, ideological, and economical differences between people, states, and countries. Were these differences not the reasons why America fought for their independence in the Revolutionary War? Were these differences not the primary cause for the American Civil War? The idea of manifest destiny is as old as America itself. The philosophy sailed with Christopher Columbus across the Atlantic. It resided in the spirits of the Jamestown colonists, and it landed at Plymouth Rock with the Pilgrims. No, it also traveled with fire and brimstone preachers during the Great Awakening and built the first national road. Yes. Throughout history, there are numerous examples of manifest destiny. However, in early American history, synonyms were used to explain the not yet named phenomenon. American history books were filled with terms such as explorers, frontier, territories, expansionism, settlers, idealism, sectionalism, and immigration. Okay, that's a little. I'm a little more convinced. Without manifest destiny, phrases and terms such as beyond the Great American Desert, the Northwestern Passage, and the Oregon Trail would just be empty examples of white man's travels. Okay, that's fair. Yeah, okay, I see what you're saying. A disputed philosophy. Much of the talk about manifest destiny had many people suggesting that America should... Wait, who published that? Who owned a printing press? What do you mean? Who was talking to the most people? What? A disputed philosophy. Much of the talk about manifest destiny had many people suggesting that America should assume the role of a world power. James Monroe in 1822 echoed this idea in his famous Monroe Doctrine when he warned Europe and the rest of the world to stay out of the Western Hemisphere. In the months following the Spanish-American War, the idea of expansionism grew strong across the United States. In Congress, legislators called for the annexation of all... I'm trying to read faster, and it's not letting me. So I'm being assaulted and slowed down. Called for the annexation of all Spanish territories. Some newspapers even suggested the annexation of Spanish self-expansionists such as Roosevelt, former President Harrison, and I'm being assaulted. I'm being assaulted. I'm being assaulted. I'm being assaulted. Expansionists such as Roosevelt, former President Harrison, and Captain Mahan argued for creating an American empire. I'm being assaulted. I'm being assaulted. However, others, including Grover Cleveland, Andrew Carnegie, and Mark Twain, oppose these ideas. Manifest destiny became a disputed philosophy. The following are two examples of very different views of the American people. Of the different views of the American people. I'm being assaulted. I'm being assaulted, so I can't finish on time. This is evidence of the opposing attitudes towards the manifest destiny ideology. In the 1837 letter to Henry Clay, William E. Channing wrote, "Did this country know itself, or were it disposed of profit by self-knowledge, it would feel the necessity of laying an immediate curb on its passion for extended territory? We are a restless people, prone to encroachment, impatient of the ordinary laws of progress. We boast all rapid growth, forgetting that throughout the nature, noble growth is slowed. It is full time that we should lay on ourselves serious, resolute restraint. Possessed of a domain vast enough for the growth of ages, it is time for us to stop the career of acquisition and conquest. Already endangered by our greatness, we cannot advance without imminent peril to our institutions, union, prosperity, virtue, and peace. It is something said that of nations are swayed by laws. It is unfailing as those which govern matter. that they have their destinies, that their character and position carry them forward irresistibly to their goal. That the Indians have melted before the white man, and the mixed degraded race of Mexico must melt before the Anglo-Saxon. Away with this vile sophistry! There is no necessity for crime. There is no fate to justify rapacious nations, any more than to justify gamblers, robbers, and in plunder. We boast of the progress of society, and this progress consists in the substitution of reason and moral principle for the sway of brute force. We talk of accomplishing our destiny. So did the late conqueror of Europe, and destiny consigned him to a lonely rock in the ocean, the prey of ambition, which destroyed no peace but his own. As an example of the opposing attitude and the attitude that was voiced by the majority of Americans at the time, the following article appeared in the Democratic Review in 1845. Texas has been absorbed into the Union in the inevitable fulfillment of the general law which is rolling all population westward. It was disintegrated from Mexico in the natural course of events by a process perfectly legitimate on its own part, blameless on ours. Incorporation into the Union was not only inevitable, but the most natural, right, and prosper thing in the world. California will probably next fall away from Mexico, imbecile and distracted. Mexico can exert any real never can exert any real governmental authority over such a country. The Anglo-Saxon foot is already on its borders. Already the advance guard of the irresistible army of Anglo-Saxon emigration has begun to pour down upon it, armed with the plow and rifle, and marking its trail with schools and colleges, courts and representative halls, mill and meeting houses. A population will soon be in actual occupation of California, over which it will be idle for Mexico to dream of dominion. All this without agency of our government, without responsibility of our people. In natural flow of events, the spontaneous working of principles, and the adaptation of the tendencies and wants of the human race to the elemental circumstances in the midst of which they find themselves placed. Oh, do it again. Okay. Man, that's some shit. That sucked. That one sucked immensely. They call them greasers. Don't! Are you serious? Are you fucking serious, dude? I'm being assaulted! What the fuck? I can't. I fucking can't. Okay, one chapter? Okay. Yeah, that's simple enough. Sure. Whoa. Remember, this is an educational stream. Just, you know, they'll tell me it's not, because I don't pay enough money. What's the chapter called? Initial contact. Oh, yeah, right there. Alright. Let's get this over with. Alright, let's rip it. Let's go. Initial contacts redeeming Texas from Mexicans, 1821 to 1836. Oh. Just my jaw, dude. Oh my god. time is it? All right, 44 minutes. We've almost finished the reading. I'm being slowed down. Initial context: redeeming Texas for Mexicans 1821 to 1836. Most whites who first met Tejanos in the 1820s had never had prior experience with Mexicans nor encountered them anywhere else. Yet the reaction of them upon contact was contemptuous, many thinking Mexicans abhorrent, which caused pioneers to feel this way. What caused pioneers to feel this way? Why were their attitudes bigoted instead of neutral? What did they find in Mexicans that aroused the xenophobic behavior, or what was it within themselves that generated that response? According to one Texas historian, Anglo settlers who entered Texas accepted Mexicans on a basis of equality initially and did not react scornfully toward the native Tejanos until the Texas War for Independence of 1836. Relationships before then, according to him, were characterized by marked tolerance, lack of basic antipathy between the two races, and an almost total lack of friction traceable to racial problems. In the opinion of another student of Anglo attitudes during the 1821 and to 1845 period, white feelings toward Mexicans were very complex, at times contradictory, and constantly in flux. The latest scholarship on the subject of racial and cultural attitudes, however, does not sustain these arguments. Americans moving to the West, recent studies indicate, had much more in mind than settling the land and creating prosperous communities. Cultural heirs to Elizabethan and Puritans, those moving to hinterlands, sensed an heir into the wilderness, and felt a compelling need to control all that was beastly, sexuality, vice, nature, and colored peoples. Order and discipline had to be rescued from the wilds in the name of this civilization and Christianity. Moving westward with this mission uppermost in their minds, whites psychologically needed to subdue the external world, forests, beasts, and other peoples. For the rational had to ever be in command. Coming into constant encounter with peoples of color in wilderness settings, these sensitive whites struggled against non-civilization. To allow an inverse order and a concomitant surrender of themselves and their liberties to primitive things was to allow chaos to continue with God's will, when God's will was to impose Christian order. Oh, it was a mixed bag. Didn't you hear that last speech? It was a fucking mixed bag. Oh, I hear my jaw popping. Oh. Oh. Alright, just trying not to hurt myself. The desire to bring fields and Indians under submission did not emanate solely from the religious passion, but was also a product of the individual compulsion to repress instinctual urges. Within humanity were encased base impulses, sexuality, savagery, that were just as primitive and animalistic as the things of the forest, which demanded domination. Killing, destruction, subordination, and appropriation of lands not only brought the external wilderness under control, but also served as a form of release for the animal within. In prevailing over primitive things through violence, whites found regeneration, but their efforts also resulted in the uglier manifestation of racism. Therein lied the seed for the perverse responses towards Mexicanos in the first encounter. Waves of Anglo settlers. God damn it! Waves of Anglo settlers to Texas from the Mexican Railroad in 1821 granted colonization rights in the province in Missouri and to a Missouri entrepreneur named Otis Austin. I tried. I really tried. If I wear that thing when I sleep, I'm gonna drown. I'm actually just gonna choke on my own spit and die. So, yeah, sorry, buddy. That fucking sucks. Hundreds more followed thereafter, coming to Mexican Texas under the aegis of Moses' son Stephen and other empresarios. Most were not radically different from the pre-19th century pioneers. Like them, they entertained a strong belief in themselves and the superiority of their way of life. Why, asked the historian Samuel L. Laurie in his study of cultural conflict in Texas, were Americans as narrow and freedom-loving as frontiersmen, willing to settle in a country as religiously tolerant intolerant and undemocratic as Mexico. Perhaps because they felt it their duty to make some order of what they perceived as chaos. Certainly, they uttered such sentiments many times, although Lori did not discern it. Given the state of coexistence, it's clear that I'm being insulted. This is Productivity Maximization Index, where we maximize productivity. Watch out for our latest release, Box Fuckers, coming soon to Steam. Certainly, they uttered such sentiments many times, though Laurie did not discern it. Given the state of scholarships in the 1930s when he wrote his study, as William H. Wharton, one of the more radical agitators for independence from Mexico, put it in an appeal for American support as the revolution went on to Texas, the justice and benevolence of God which forbid. Fuck! I'm being assaulted! I am being assaulted. The justice and benevolence of God which forbid that, but I'm being assaulted. I'm being fucking assaulted. The justice and benevolence of God which forbid that the delightful region of Texas should again become a howling wilderness trod only by savages, or that it should be permanently benighted by the ignorance and superstition, the anarchy and rapine of Mexican misrule. The Anglo-American race are destined for kill yourself, to be forever the proprietors of this land of promise and fulfillment. Their laws will govern it. Their learning will enlighten it. Their enterprise will improve it. Their flocks will range its boundless pastures. For them, its fertile land will yield their luxuriant harvest. Its beauteous rivers will waft the products of their industry and enterprise. And their latest prosperity will here enjoy legacies of price unspeakable in the possession of homes fortified by the genius of liberty and sanctified by the spirit of a beneficent and tolerant religion. This is inevitable, for the wilderness of Texas has been redeemed by Anglo-American blood and enterprise. The colonists have carried with them the language, the habits, and lofty love of liberty that has always characterized and distinguished their ancestors. They have identified them indissolubly They've identified them indissolubly with the country. But none was more articulate than Stephen F. Austin, who several times before the War for Independence confessed almost stereotypically that his intent was to redeem Texas from the wilderness. In one of the most eloquent expressions he averred, "My object, the sole and only desire of my ambition since I first saw Texas, was to redeem it from the wilderness, to settle it with an intelligent, honorable, and enterprising people." That's why Texas sucks. I want to screenshot some of this. Hold on. Hinterlands, huh? That's in World of Warcraft. Yeah. Yeah, that's why anger is banned on the internet. Your age videos are gone because these people showed up again. To Austin, redemption could come by whitening. It's slowing down my hard drive too. Uh, whitening. I saw whitening. By whitening Texas, or phrased differently, by making it a cultural and racial copy of the United States. In August 1835, you wrote that the best interests of the nation required that Texas should be effectually and fully Americanized, that is, settled by a population that will harmonize with their neighbors on the East in language, political principles, common origin, sympathy, and even interest. It was well known, he continued, that his object had always been to fill up his objective had always been to fill up Texas with a North American population. I wish a great immigration from Kentucky, Tennessee, everywhere, passports or no passports. Anyhow, for 14 years, I've had a hard time of it, but nothing shall daunt my courage or abate my exertions to complete the main objective of my labors, to Americanize Texas. This fall and winter will fix our fate. A great immigration will settle the question. Can I get a little bit of... Can't change the order like that. Thank you. Thank you. Who wrote this? Arnoldo de Leon. That's how you spell that. Leon. Thank you. All right, let's come on. Let's rip it. Jesus. At the national level, Americans had never been oblivious to the prospects of rescuing Texas from its alleged primitive status. At all times, there had been those in Washington who had similar thoughts and expressed them publicly. Among them was Henry Clay, who asked in 1821, by what race should Texas be peopled, lest it be settled by others who would make it a place of despotism and slaves of the Inquisition and superstition. It should be taken over by settlers of the United States who would transplant it to the free institutions of Anglo-Americans. Should Texas then break off from the United States for the same reason, Clay affirmed, at least it would have been rescued from an alien race, from a race alien to everything that American held dear. Clay did not stop at rhetoric. While he was Secretary of State, he and President John Quincy Adams instructed Joel R. Poinsett, the American United States minister to Mexico, to attempt to purchase Texas. Mexico, which had never put Texas up for sale, squarely rejected the proposal, only to see it repeated. When Andrew Jackson assumed office in 1829, he urged Poinsett to renew his efforts, authorizing the minister to offer $5 million to whatever amount of Texas Mexico would surrender. Similar futile attempts at negotiating the purchase of Texas continued until the time of the Revolution. What whites refused to accept was that a state of affairs in which chaos presided over them. What whites refused to accept was a state of affairs in which chaos presided over them. But what exactly was it that they considered as disorder? Texas was already settled and under the rule of a government heir to centuries of Spanish civilization. Something else disturbed them. For to them, a connection existed in the new lands between the state of civilization and chaos. Thus, all the discussion about rescuing Texas from primitivism. The newcomers saw the Tejanos as mongrels, uncivilized and unchristian, part of the wilderness that must be subdued. Living in Mexico and Texas were a sort of people who threatened the march of white civilization. Dude, this makes dating so hard. This shit makes dating like really fucking hard, bro. Like, Bro, it is so hard to date because of this shit. Like, I'm not even joking. This isn't even funny, dude. Like, shit really, like, alienates you from people. Like, makes you think twice about who the fuck comes around. Bro, I've never liked Texas. Oh, God. Texas has bad vibes, dude. It's been having bad vibes. Enhance efficiency. What does it do? Tell them they're wasting time? The fuck was that? Dude, what the fuck? Clay did not stop at red. Incontrovertibly, as far as whites were concerned, order and discipline were missing. For Anglo settlers who arrived in Texas, imported certain ideas from the United States, which regarded the native Mexican population as less than civilized. These attitudes ranged from xenophobia against Catholics and Spaniards to racial prejudice against Indians and blacks. Thus, Mexicanos were doubly suspected as their heirs to Catholicism and descendants of Spaniards, Indians, and Africans. In England, hostile feelings toward the Roman Church originated in the 16th century when Henry VIII's religious and political break with the Pope, and were hardened by conflict with Catholic Spain. The English mind readily, oh my fucking god. The English mind readily thought in terms of a Catholic-Spanish alliance, conjured by Satan himself, from which nothing less than demonic designs could be expected. Additionally, the English associated the Spanish with cruelty and brutality, alleged Spanish tyranny in the Netherlands during the latter half of the 16th century, as well as atrocities towards the Indians in Latin America, produce an image of the Spaniard as heartless and genocidal. And finally, the English saw the Spanish as an embodiment of racial impurity. For hundreds of years, racial mixing or mestizaje had occurred in the Iberian Peninsula between Spaniards and Moors. At the time when Elizabethans were becoming more and more sensitive to the significance of color, equating whiteness with purity and Christianity with blackness with baseness and the devil, Spanish came to be thought of as not much better than light-skinned Moors and Africans. Jesus fucking Christ. English immigrants to the North American colonies probably brought these ideas with them and were certainly exposed to them through anti-Catholic and anti-Spanish literature, constantly arriving in the new society. Tapping my fucking teeth again. Men of letters, ministers, and propagandists helped in disseminating such notions. Military clashes along the Georgia-Florida border in the 18th century only intensified the hatred. As for the Mexican Aborigines, the English conceived of them as the degenerate creatures, unchristian, uncivilized, and racially impure. For letters, histories, and travel narratives, English writers had put together a portrait that turned the people of Mexico into a degraded humanity. The natives subscribed to heathenism, and witches and other devilish agents permeated their culture. They partook of unholy things like polygamy, sodomy, and incest, and rejected Christianity outright. Furthermore, they practiced savage rituals like human sacrifice and cannibalism. What? Of all the Latin American inhabitants, the Mexican Indians seemed the most beastly, for they had... Oh, man, that's just too funny. Of all the Latin American inhabitants, the Mexican Indians seemed the most beastly, for though they were in many ways the most advanced of all the New World peoples, they exercised the grossest violation of civility by these practices. Stories of Aztec gods like Quetzalcoatl, who were half men and half beasts, and accounts of exotic Aztec rites only convinced the English of the Indians' place on the fringes of society, with dubious claims to existence, civilization, and Christian civilization and Christian salvation. Holy fuck. While such images of the Mexican natives may not have been as widespread as those held by Spaniards, they were nonetheless familiar to many colonists. In newspapers, recent histories, and re-editions of old propaganda materials. Furthermore, colonists were able to read things about the origins of the Mexicans, which perpetuated and rich images acquired from their mother country. Literally never forgot. Bro, they lie. Fucking really? Being assaulted, dude. Bro. In addition to those ideas that have been fashioned vicariously, there were those that arose from intimate contact with other peoples whom whites esteemed no more than the Mexican Aborigines or Spaniards. The long history of hostilities against North American Indians on the frontier and the institution of Afro-American slavery molded negative attitudes towards dark skin, savagery, vice, and interracial sex. The majority of those who responded in empresarial calls were most assuredly thought along those lines, for they came from the states west of the Appalachians and south of the Ohio River. Did they offer money? Louisiana, Alabama, Arkansas, Tennessee, Missouri, Mississippi, Georgia, and Kentucky. A significant number were Eastern born, but had been part of the frontier movement before the transplantation into Texas. From the southern and frontier oriented culture, oh Jesus, they had acquired a certain repulsion for Russian people and a distaste for miscegenation, believing that the wars of their own provincial institutions. Believing that the mores of their own provincial institutions should apply in the new frontier, they assumed a posture of superiority and condescension toward the natives. By conditioning, they were predisposed to react intolerably to people they had found different from themselves, but similarly to those they considered as enemies and as superiors. Along with dislikes for Spaniards and the Indians of Latin America, these perceptions reduced a mode of thinking that set the contours of the primordial response. It just sounds like they're talking about VTubers. On God, it just sounds like they're talking about VTubers and Twitch streamers. And what particularly provoked this reaction? Los Tejanos were descendants of Tlaxcalan Indians and mestizo soldiers from the Coahuila, Coahuila, Coahuila. Additionally, a few in Nacogdoches were the offspring of people from Louisiana and reflected that area's racial amalgam, including Indians and blacks. Throughout the province, Tejanos had intermarried among themselves and with Christianized Indian women from local missions so that the colonists continued as a mixed blood population. Their contrast to whites and salient kindred to black and red made Mexican subject to treatment commensurate with the odious connotations which attached to college, race, and cultures dissimilar to their own. Manifestly, Americans who integrated their sexes confronted the native Mexicans with certain Greek conceptions about their character. What's believed that the inhabitants of the province had descended from a tradition of paganism, depravity, and primitivism. The Mexicans were the type of book that Americans should avoid becoming. That is so fucking ironic, huh? The fact of the matter is that the whites had little contact with the Tejanos up to 1836, for most of the Mexican population was concentrated in the San Antonio and La Bahia areas, quite a distance from the Anglo colonies. But whites knew that what they could find in Texas before the contact confirmed their convictions. They encountered biologically decadent and inferior people because their thoughts had been shaped by the aforementioned circumstances. Thus, Mexicans lived in a way that Anglos equated with an opprobrious condition. They inhabited primitive shelters. William F. Gray, a land agent from Virginia, comparing Mexicans with the black American culture he knew, pronounced some of the Mexican homes miserables or shabbled jacales, scarcely equal in appearance to the Afro-American houses in the suburbs of his state.
and Mexicans adhere to a different religion. They are completely enslaved with food superstitions and despotism, and religion was understood not as an affection of the heart and the soul, but one requiring personal mortification and such superficialities as penances and other rituals. If Anglos and Mexicans were not inherently different peoples, editorialized the Texian and Immigrant Guide in 1835, habit, education, and religion made them essentially so. Additionally, Texans has the Mexican cultural. I don't know. I feel this way, huh? I feel this way, huh? I'm learning a lot about my mom. Just as a reminder. Additionally, Texans have that Mexican cultural and heritage clash with American values such as the work ethic. Mexicanos share in traditional backward aggregate and irresponsibly passive, doubtfully youthful, dedicated to the present and resigned, not to fraud the universal anthem. An American arriving in Nacogdoches in 1833 from the citizens there, the most lazy, intolerant, part-starved set of people as ever the sun shined upon. He could not comprehend their lethargy by day, nor their inclination to play the violin and dance the entire night. J.C. Crawford of Ohio reasoned in 1828 that Mexicanos were too ignorant and indolent for enterprise and too foreign dependent were they otherwise capacitated. Mexicanos eventually succumbed to indolence and ease and indulged themselves in soca music, dancing, and horse racing and other sports, noted David Woodman, a founder for New York and Boston Land Company, which while activity, industry, and frugality marched on in the new American settlements. The vigor of the descendants of the sturdy North will never mix with the flame of the indolent Mexicans. Sam Houston, the future hero of the War for Independence, argued in January 1875 in an address to the citizens of Texas, no matter how long they live among them. In contrast to the newcomers, the honors were chained to accustomed to complacency and instead of committing themselves to progress, they proved fun and frolic. Some 3 years after Mexico opened Texas to Anglo-American settlement, Anthony R. Clark complained that Spaniards in the district of Nacogdoches, generally of the lower sort and illiterate, would rather spend days in gambling to gain a few bits and make a living in honest industry. William Davies lived in San Antonio in the late 1820s, found Vereños totally hedonistic. Their whole study seemed to be for enjoyment. Mirth and amusement occupied their whole time. If one is fond of balls and theaters, he can have an opportunity to attending one every evening.
This is like when my mom thinks she fucking this is like when my mom thinks she fucking knows what I'm doing all the time and fucking beats my ass for it. Like Any opportunity to drag my mom. On God. Also, every species of dissipation is indulgent except drinking. In Goliad, the Mexicans had such a strong predisposition to gambling that almost all the inhabitants in 1833 were gamblers and smugglers, said impresario Dr. Ron Charles Beals. And Alexander McCrae, touring Texas in 1835 under the auspices of the Williamton Emigrating Society, remarked in astonishment, I, for the first time, saw females betting at a gambling table. I do not suppose they were respectable standing in society from the company they kept. I am told that it is not all uncommon for Mexican ladies to be seen gambling in public. Oh. Acting further to stimulate negative attitudes was the racial composition of Tejanos, who, in the white mind, were closely identified with other colored peoples. For 200 years, ideas that black men lusted for white women and notions that slaves were of a heathen or savage condition were played upon Americans' fantasies. The result had been the institutional displacement of blacks because of their race. Images of the Indian as fierce, hostile, and barbaric similarly affixed themselves in the thoughts of the white settlers, and constant confrontation over land led more to the reaffirmation of these images than to their dissolution. Consequently, when whites arrived in Texas, they unconsciously transferred onto the new colored folk. They encountered a pseudoscientific lore acquired from generations of interaction with blacks and Indians. Travelers who frequently came in contact with Tejanos plainly discerned the Mexican relation to the black and red peoples. At no time did Americanos, although Frenchmen or Germans, or themselves for that matter, out of people who physically resemble Mexicans, comparison with the Indians and blacks. Several factors steered discussion in that direction. English were not about to elevate Mexicans to the level of European whiteness. Their own sense of superiority turned Tejanos into a people lesser than themselves, and obviously, in any comparison, Mexicans were doing to resemble their progenitors. No, it's because land developers wanted it. It's for that cash, baby. Something fucked up was happening there. Kind of shit you forget. Thus, whites often likened Mexicans to Africans and Native Americans. When Klopper mentioned that the complexion of the Tejanos, he thought a shade redder than that of the Aborigines of the country. On the other hand, the land agent Gray snapped Tejanos as a swarthy-looking people much resembling our mulattoes, some of them nearly black. Sam Houston asked his compatriots in the aforementioned address if they would bow under the yoke of these half-Indians, while abolitionist Benjamin Lundy in Laredo in 1834 remarked that the Mexicans in the town looked like mulattoes. Even when commentators omitted drawing comparisons about color, they nonetheless made reference to the Mexicans' dark complexion. One traveler asserted that because of it, they were readily designated at first sight. Who went to Texas? Sorry, who went to Texas? What the fuck? Maybe. The same association with Indians and Africans was also apparent in caustic comments with the Mexicans' ancestors. The Texan identifying himself as HH in a letter to the New Orleans Bee in 1834 pronounced the people of Mexico the most degraded and vile and unfortunate race of Spaniards, Indian, and American. It is so blended that the worst qualities of each predominate. 2 years later, when the Texans were locked in a fitful struggle with the Mexican nation, leaders of the rebellion appealed to their comrades by reminding them that Mexicans were the adulterated and degenerate brood of the once high-spirited Castilian. What? In addition to all their discoveries of Mexicans, it's the money. Thank you, Kanka. Thank you, Kanka.
In addition to all their other discoveries about Mexicans, whites in the period between 1821 and 1836 thought Tejanos lacked in virtue, and other aspects of Mexican morality rather than including the native fandango, a dance of sinuous start with sensually suggestive moves. George W. Smith from Tennessee witnessed it in Nacogdoches during it. This is all going down in Nacogdoches. Upon his arrival in 1830, and was surprised that the free.
Bro, apparently this is all just going down in Nacogdoches, bro.
Because of the apparent rivalry of such recreational foreign rights began early on to assume Mexicans had a defective morality and Mexican attitudes towards sexuality strengthened the white image of Mexicans as sensuous and voluptuous. Despite the close supervision given unmarried girls to prevent intercourse in their male counterparts, Clawfer alleged as soon as they married, they were scarcely the same creatures, given their free indulgence to their naturally gay and enthusiastic dispositions, as if liberated from all moral restraints. To the Ohioan, Mexicans were not cut from the same moral fabric as Americans. But even if Mexicans as a race were sexually degenerate, some exception might be made for the females, especially by those men wandering into areas like Behar, where white women were scarce, and thus Mexican women might be attractive, even if they were mixed blood. Among those venturing into San Antonio at this early date was Klopper, who considered the local women handsome of person and regular in feature with black sparkling eyes and a brighter hue than men. What the fuck? What the fuck?
Dude, bronies too. Fucking bronies too.
Like others of this era, he had a preference for those who came closer to the American ideal of female beauty and purity. Becoming friendly with one of the Castilian senoritas, Coffer wrote a meticulous description of his acquaintance. She was of the middle size, a person of the finest symmetry, he noted, moving through the mazes of the fandango with all the graces that distinguish the superiority of person of mind and of soul. Her features were beautiful, forming in the combination and expression that fixed the eyes of the observer as with a spell. Her complexion was that of the loveliest, the snowy brightness of her well-turned forehead beautifully contrasting with the carnation tints of her cheeks. A succession of smiles were continually spreading around her mouth. He elaborated. Her pouting cherry lips were irresistible, and even when closed seemed to have utterance. Her eyes, but I had no such language. I seemed to be stricken by it. Else might I tell how dangerous it was to meet its luster, and feel its quick, thrilling scrutiny of the heart, as though the very fire of its expression was conveyed with its beaming. The admirer admitted in closing, I felt lonely and sad as a stranger in that place, and a vision so lovely coming unexpectedly before me could not fail to awaken tender recollection and together make an impression not to be forgotten.
Bro. Fucking tainted.
Interceptors. Following an
Bro, tainted on race, bro.
Though not much else was said on the issues of interracial sex, at least one section brought up a theme that would preoccupy white males after 1836. Mexican women, he thought, manifested a decided preference for foreigners and would willingly consent to marriage should they be approached. Where a Mexican woman becomes attached to her, few can love more warmly, he added. And it would probably be safe to conjecture that at least some of the women that the future hero of the Alma, William Barrett Travis Chingo, were Mexicans. Despite their comments about the passionate Mexican women, White did not say much about the sexually virile males. During the revolution, however, historical texts did inject a sexual dimension into the war, crying out that Mexican soldiers were sexual threats to white women. What can be expected for the fair daughters of Chess, white women, their own country, or for and when their own process, whatever, just banned from fucking. I got banned from Chibidoki for posting a book. As a referred daughters to church, blah 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 blah. I know. No, I know. The vision of Mexican rapists seemingly reflected white men's state of mind as of 1836. Probably they saw in Mexicans the same threat that horrified them in black males, and it was too early for them to have formulated their other perceptions. As it turned out, no violations were reported, and the rape theme practically disappeared, rarely to crop up again, even though in subsequent times Texans faced other threats of Mexican violence. After the episode, Anglos seldom saw Mexicans as a danger to white women. The events of 1836 brought forth charges of Mexican depravity and violence, a theme which became... That's just not true. The events of 1836 brought forth charges of Mexican depravity and violence, a theme which became... Well, a theme that became racial once Anglos in closer contact with the states to surrender population following the war. In the crisis of the moment, firebrands spoke alarmingly of savage, degenerate, half-civilized, and barbarous Mexicans committing massacres and atrocities at Goliad and the Alamo. Even worse, whites conjured up ideas of slave uprisings and possible alliance between slaves and slave rebels and Mexicans, whom whites considered to be infused with African blood anyway. Entrepreneur James Workin reported that slaves high among the Trinity were daringly seeking to enlist the Coshada Indians and come down and murder the inhabitants in the Galveston regions and join the Mexicans. A resolution adopted of Mexican citizens meeting, they just killed the fucking allies. In Brasoria, in March 1836, warned in concertation, we have moreover been apprised of the horrid purpose of the treacherous and bloody enemy to unite in his ranks, and our census is only in savage work, whether slave or free, thus lighting the torch of war in the bosoms of our domestic circles. Such talk may be part of the hysteria that ordinarily accompanies war propaganda everywhere, but in any case, some whites are already regarding Mexicans as cool enough to be considered less than human, and thus responsible, like Indians, Africans, and animals. Reminiscing about his role in the struggle between Texas and Mexico, Creed Taylor recalled, "I thought I could shoot Mexicans as well as I could shoot Indians, or deer, or turkeys, so I rode away to the war." Similarly, 80-year-old Cheyenne R. Woodstick of San Salvador County reminisced in 1900 that although he did not know the real causes of the conflict, he joined it as, "I thought I could kill Mexicans as easy as I could kill deer and turkeys." Oh my god, remnants of the fucking slogan, bro. Bro. The cell persists. The cell persists. The slogans persist. The cell persists. The cell persists. The slogans persist. Don't draw it. Just fucking say it. What whites found in the Texas experience during these first 15 years was that Mexicans were primitive beings who, during the century of residence in Texas, had failed to improve their status and environment. Mexicans were religious pagans, purposelessly indolent and carefree, sexually remiss, degenerate, afraid, and questionably human. The haunting prospect of being ruled by such people indefinitely explains in part the Texan movement for independence in 1836. Bro, no, it doesn't. They were Christians. Anyone who went there of their own accord to meet new people knew that they were Christians. It was hurting. It was hurting. It was hurting, dude. They herded them there. Bro, people were herded to Texas. That doesn't make any fucking sense. Historians, however, have not paid due attention to these attitudes of factors in the movement for independence, and for to do so is to come close to labeling the first generation of Texans as racist. White racism toward the indigenous Mexican population, some would maintain, not developed until after an extended period of interaction between Texans and Mexicans. Not until decades later, others contend, did science postulate the biological inferiority of certain peoples, thereby begetting racist practices. Yet such arguments have ignored the baneful ubiquity of race in the forging of the American national character, and neglected the psychological implications of its presence, and are inattentive to the deep-seated resentment whites felt towards dark-skinned people whenever they came in contact with them. They have overlooked the motivating forces of white supremacy and compelling need of white America to press ahead with the task of civilizing colored peoples and what they stood for.
I can post that. I can post that. You know what? People like the resolution too. Why did that open? The fuck? Getting air gapped, bro. My keystrokes are being air gapped.
Assessing racial prejudice is not taking account of American psychic characters that come in interact with Mexicans in Texas. Admittedly, racism was not the cause of the Mexican, and certainly it was very prominent as promoting an underlying cause. The church was reflected on the unique psychohistorical experience of the white Texas nation settlers. Deep in the heat of the crisis, leaders of the revolution revealed feelings about the race that surely contributed to their strike for independence. Stephen S. Austin described his capacity to understand a culture different from his and assimilate into that culture with versatility, nevertheless revealed latent racist feelings as the combat raged. It was, he said, one of the barbarism ways why mongrel Spanish, Indian, and race against civilization and the Anglo-American race. David G. Burnett, president of the Ad Interim Revolutionary Government, wrote to Senator Henry Clay, "The causes which have led to this monumentous act are too numerous to be detailed in a single letter, but one general fact may account for all: the utter dissimilarity of character between the two people, the Texans and the Americans." The first are principally Anglo-Americans. The others are a mongrel race of degenerate Spaniards and Indians, more depraved than they. Much later, it was admitted that among the main reasons for the origins of the conflict was the insuperable aversion to social amalgamation between whites and Mexicans. The colonists from the north were somewhat homogenous in blood and color. The Mexicans a mongrel breed of Indians and Spaniards of the baser sort. Thus, beneath the talk of oppression lingered underpinnings of white supremacy and racial antipathy. In truth, the Texans never experienced oppression like that of others who have risen in rebellion. The Mexican government was thousands of miles away, afflicted with internal problems and unable to pay proper attention to what was transpiring in Texas. Culturally, the Americans got along well with the Criollo elite. In fact, after the revolution, the Criollos, who closely resembled Anglos in racial makeup, were comfortably fitted into white society. There's a lot of colorism in Mexico, actually, that's probably consequential from that. Moreover, wherever Anglos went individually and found themselves in a minority, they adjusted adequately to Mexican culture. This was the case for decades. See what I mean? You see what I mean? You see what I mean? You see what I mean?
You see what I mean? But in Coahuila y Tejas, Anglos were dealing primarily not with the Criollos, but with mixed blood or mongrel Mexicans. And by 1836, Texas was very different from later southwestern settings. Although Texas was not legally American, it might as well have been. It was white, attitudinally, politically, socially, economically, and demographically, an American entity all to itself. These circumstances in which Texans of diverse social standing thought of themselves as white people instead of individuals incited the daring and master quest for supremacy of barbarian race and Mexicanos, which is to say that the Texas Revolution was one of racial adjustment. For Anglo-Texans to have accepted anything other than white supremacy and civilization was to submit to Mexican domination and to admit that Americans were willing to become like Mexicans. The prospect of being dominated by such untamed, uncivil, and disorderly creatures made a contest for racial hegemony almost inevitable. There's that fucking word I love so much, dude. And it's hegemony again. Oh no. Oh look, it's hegemony again. Cigarette butts on my cigarette butts on my balcony. All right. There's that fucking word again. And I'm never gonna stop saying it's always hegemony. Why is it always hegemony? All right. Anyone respond? Let's see. Let's see. Let's see. Alright. Next. Probably close that for now. We can listen to the podcast. You can listen to the podcast, and then I think I'm ending the stream because I have to buckle down and do math homework, and I should probably make dinner pretty soon here. Yeah. Let's do this. 31 minutes. Okay.
This message comes from Mint Mobile. Starting at $15
know
a month, make
I would do this if YouTube didn't have a policy against third-party content. So, can't do it. I can't do it. I can't do it. I want to. I can't. It's tough. It's really tough. So I'll be doing this on my own time. Probably listen to it while I cook. Yeah. This has been another edition of Productivity Maximization Index. You've seen me maximize my productivity in any way I could. Remember, wishlist box follow my social media and wishlist box fuckers as soon as it goes up on Steam. So you can be notified when the game releases, and you too can be a fucking hack/dickin' box fucker. Peace.